What you just saw and heard was a horrific spectacle that unfolded yesterday in the Knesset, Israel's parliamentary building. Family members of many of those who fell in battle or were murdered on October 7th planned to attend the Knesset plenary session, in which there was going to be a discussion of whether and when a state commission of inquiry into the October 7th disaster would be convened. The Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ohana, had instructed Knesset police to deny the family members access. And, well, mayhem ensued, as you can see, or just saw. We discuss all of this and more with Ya'akov Katz today. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel, and now bringing you the great Ya'akov Katz. Stay with us. Tuesday, March 4th. It's just after 1 p.m. in Israel, and you, Ya'akov Katz, are in London, England. And it's
This is true.
It is true. And it's 11 a.m. there, right?
Just about.
Okay. Well, thank you. Okay, we're starting 3 minutes late. Thank you so much for being available on really such short notice. I just reached out to you this morning, and it's an important day. Every day is an important day. So let's just get right to it. We don't have a lot of time, but we got a hell of a lot of ground to cover. And I'd like to start with the reports that the IDF has been releasing in kind of drip torture ways, like drip one by one, since last Thursday, I believe. They started last Thursday. There was a special briefing for the families whose loved ones had fallen on October 7th at the Nahal Oz IDF base. That was on Thursday. I understand it was a very fiery meeting. On Friday, the report was released to the public. And since then, other than Saturday, we've had a new report almost every day. We've had Nahal Oz kibbutz. We had Kfar Aza yesterday, which was horrible. We had Nir Oz in the last few days, which was horrible. Tiva Sarah, and on and on and on. The initial report, what happened at Kibbutz Be'eri, was released a few months ago, and it was not done in a very thoughtful way, and it created a bit of a mess. So now they've changed their strategy, and they're releasing these in dribs and drabs. Why? Why are they releasing it this way? And then talk to me about what we're hearing and seeing, because and we have to assume we're not getting it all. We have to assume there's stuff that's been withheld, because that's the nature of the beast. There was no army.
Well, there's a couple of pieces to this. First of all, the depressing line that you just ended with, there was no army, is unfortunately the reality. And this is what keeps coming out in every single probe that's been released since last week, when the IDF started releasing for publication all of the probes, beginning with what led up, or what transpired on the night between October 6th and October 7th, what intelligence was there, and how it was misread, misunderstood, misinterpreted by the top IDF brass. And that led to the assault that began on 6/29 on that Saturday morning, October 7th, 2023. But then every battle, right, where was the Air Force? So there was the intelligence, there was the Air Force, there was the Southern Command, but then they're looking at the battles inside each kibbutz. Why did it take the terrorists only an hour to conquer Be'eri, and why did it take the IDF literally days to reconquer Be'eri? Where did they go wrong every step of the way? And the unfortunate bottom line is, like you said, Viv, the army was non-existent. It just wasn't there. And that's something that we still don't have really an answer to. Why wasn't it there, right? Where was it that it wasn't there? There's all these explanations and excuses. Like, you look at the Air Force probe, for example. We know, this is something that I've known for a while, but, now they finally came out with it and said it, that until 9:30 on that Saturday morning, the Air Force was busy bombing targets inside the Gaza Strip. Only at 9:30 did it begin to divert its focus and resources to trying to stop the mobs from coming from Gaza into, but it was too late already. Why were they not aware that this was going on for 3 hours? And I think that those are still some questions and mysteries that we don't necessarily have a full answer beyond just a failure, right? But that's not going to necessarily suffice. The reason that it's all coming out, though, to your question, is let's remember that on Wednesday of this week, the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, is stepping down. He decided to resign early. He's being replaced by Eyal Zamir, who was a former deputy chief of staff, had lost out on the race to become chief of staff to Herzi back a number of years ago, later became appointed the Director General of the Defense Ministry. Eyal Zamir was not in uniform on October 7th, so he was kind of clean of the failures that led to it. And he is now coming back. So Herzi wanted to leave his office with I would say, like a clean slate or something, or a clean desk. He wanted to clear everything and get these probes that had been running since October 7th, pretty much, out to the public. I do have some criticism of the way they've done it. And I've spoken actually with some of my journalist friends. As you know, I was once upon a time a military reporter. So I would have been one of these guys who has been spending the last few days. And literally, they had the reporters 3-4 days holed up in a hall, meeting and hearing every probe and every officer and every panel. They flooded the field, right? This is a classic PR move. Brilliant on the side of the IDF. Unfortunately, I think some of the reporters didn't understand it because they were too much into the weeds. But what the IDF did is brilliant, because there's no way anyone can go through all of this material. There's just so much. And people will walk away with like a bit of, oh, yeah, we knew that they messed up. We knew that things didn't go the right way. But overall, no one's going to be diving deep into any of this stuff because there's just too much anyhow. So it was actually a nice site. Kudos to Daniel Hagari once again for a good PR manipulation.
Right. Yeah. And that's interesting because, of course, I try very hard to keep up with so much. And I have felt, like many of your former reporter colleagues, overwhelmed. I can't. It's more than a tsunami coming at me all the time. And each one, of course, merits very close scrutiny. The reports, as you said, kibbutz after kibbutz after kibbutz, indicate there was just nothing. And there was complete chaos. Similar scenes played out on every single kibbutz in that, and what we call the Gaza envelope area. And in one, I think it was Nativ HaAsara, there was audio that was played last night on the news of one of the army presenters saying to the people assembled, it was Nativ HaAsara because it was Sabine, the mother of those boys whose father was murdered in front of them. And he said, well, you guys should have had arms and you should be armed in the future. And she was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm a civilian. I'm a mother. I'm a woman. What arms? What are you talking about? We have to have an army there to take care of us. It's clearly not. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that, but it reminded me of a story that took place on October 7th, but even Herzi Halevi recounted it last week in briefings with journalists. Was in Kfar Aza, one of the residents is Yisrael Shomer, who's a brigadier general. And he was at the time the commander of a reserve division up in the north along the border. And he actually made a very critical decision the morning of October 7th when the attack took place. He called up some of his officers right away and said, draft everyone, send them to the north in case Hezbollah is trying to do this. Yisrael Shomer, a brigadier general, IDF, has a rifle, left his gun in his base in the north when he went home for the weekend to his house in Kfar Aza, because you don't need a gun along the border with Gaza, right? This is an IDF general, a one-star general in the IDF. Why do I mention this? So, Sabine is supposed to have a gun. Yisrael Shomer, an IDF general, didn't bring home his sidearm. Number one. Number two, Herzi told this story that when the attack began, he got in the car, started driving. At first he thought, maybe I'll go south, right? Not knowing still the extent and the severity of what was happening. and Yisrael Shomer called him up directly to his line, to his phone. So basically skipping the chain of command, but called up the chief of staff and said, listen, I'm in Kfar Aza. I'm with a kitchen knife. I'm trying to get my hands on a gun. I'm fighting. They are I see them out the window. Yisrael Shomer fought, got his hands on a gun, survived, fought back. But then Herzl understood that there's nothing for him to go down south for, that he won't be able to do anything. So he went to the Kiryah and began to manage things from up above. But I mean, they should have guns. I mean, the army should have had guns, right?
The army should have had guns and personnel on that border. And that's what Bean said when they were briefed. She said, I want to go back and live there, but we need a permanent and significant army presence. Don't tell me I have to have guns and weapons in my home. That's not how I'm going to live. I have to remind you, though, since you raised this, Herzl, driving down south and speaking to his general and saying, all right, I'm going back to the pit at the Kiryah with the rest of the boys. And I like to point out it every time that they are all boys, men. You had said months ago how Herzl Halevi should have been leading. He should have been there. He should have shown leadership that day and gone down. But now you're saying something a little different, right?
No, I think, look, I think that at the end of the day, he has done, from October 7th until now, he's tried to do the best job that he can, right? He definitely is to blame for October 7th, and particularly, in my view, at least, for the misinterpretation and the misread of the intelligence that was coming in was done by him on phone consultations that he held and with directives that he handed down to his subordinates in the operations directorate and in the Southern Command. I was also long of the opinion that I think he should have stepped down earlier. I don't know that it should have waited 18 months almost for him to step down. But I do think that he deserves credit for a lot of how Israel has succeeded in, to some extent, re-engineering the Middle East. Question of what will come of that, separate conversation. But I think that in that moment, he did make the right decision to go. There would, as we know, right, when cars drove on Road 232, which you know well, right, from living in that area now, they were caught in ambushes by Hamas. I mean, God forbid that the chief of staff would have been killed that day in one of those ambushes. I think that it was the right move. Obviously, his record will forever be stained by the events that led to this happening.
Okay, so our cup runneth over. We had a lot of time keeping my eye on the clock here. I want to move on to briefly discuss what seems to be a kind of an impasse with respect to ongoing hostage releases by Hamas and the ceasefire, or the 6-week kind of term of the last agreement expired, I believe, on Friday or Saturday. There was a lot of scurrying. It was kind of hard to keep track of the back and forth. But I think the bottom line is it came down to a last-minute suggestion by Steve Witkoff and the White House that the ceasefire be extended by 2 weeks and that additional hostages be released. There was also another variation that said, I think, some sort of indefinite extension, or it was for a month, and half the hostages living and dead be released immediately, and the remaining living and dead be released at the end of a 3-4 week period. Whatever. There's a lot of stuff going around. What we do know is the ceasefire is broken down. Hamas is saying we don't agree to anything that's been proposed. Israel is saying we are going to halt aid from going into the Gaza Strip. We may also cut off electricity, and we're going to give Hamas 10 days to sort things out before we go back to war. What's your thought on kind of this twilight zone we find ourselves in?
Well, this is, Netanyahu's kind of strategy, which is to not go from stage 1 to stage 2, but try to go from stage 1 to stage 1.2, right? To try to do something somewhere in the middle, extend stage 1, keep getting hostages in drip and drop, right? A few at a time in exchange for prisoner releases, in exchange for keeping the ceasefire going to some extent. but without having to do two primary things. One, declare an end to the war, which he cannot do politically and retain his coalition. Two, withdraw IDF troops, particularly from the Philadelphia corridor, which again could potentially lead to his coalition also unraveling. So Netanyahu is trying to go somewhere in the middle. To his luck, or this I'm guessing was prearranged, right? He has the support for the time being of the president of the United States, Donald Trump, to be able to do this, right? We've seen what happens when the American president does not support a foreign leader. But in this case, he is supporting Netanyahu. And with that, we know that Steve Witkoff, the special Middle East envoy for Trump, has put forward a proposal that also sees the extension of what was up until, let's say, Saturday, the first stage of the hostage deal. Now, definitely the question will come down to, okay, let's assume as of now, Hamas is not agreeing. And let's assume Hamas doesn't agree. So Israel, for now, has taken step one of the scenario Hamas not agreeing and has said we're suspending all humanitarian aid to Gaza, right? What happens in step two of Hamas not agreeing? Well, Bezalel Smotrich already said no electricity, maybe no water, right? We're going to cut even more supplies to Gaza. Okay, but then what? If they still don't agree, are we resuming fighting or are we not resuming fighting? And if we are resuming fighting, does that mean no more hostages coming back? And if we're not resuming fighting, then what are we doing? So I still don't see the full strategy of where this is all leading to, because if at the end of the day, you are of the belief, and I think I could say that you are, I know that I am, that getting back the hostages right now, the 24 living hostages, is the most important imperative out there, then that's what you should be focused on, right? And if that means going to stage two, go to stage two right now. Hamas will give you 1,000,001 reasons in a few months from now to go back and resume the fighting if you want to. But these 24 hostages don't have that time.
I totally agree. And I think that we've been consistent in that regard from the very beginning. You may have missed my long discussion just the other day with Jonathan Conricos, and he takes a different view from us. He thinks we should be going in there full-on war, and that the possible loss of life in terms of all the remaining hostages is something with which we have to contend. I can't accept that. It was a lively discussion we had. But we're going to stick with the hostages because there's so much going on. And to me, that's always been like a really, really meaningful distillation of everything that went wrong on October 7th and in the years leading up to it, is the focus on that Nahal Oz base, because everything at the Nahal Oz base, it's a very concentrated metaphor for things that went wrong everywhere in the Gaza area. You have hostages from there. You have soldiers trying to do their job, but being overwhelmed. And you have the clearest signs of an army in total dysfunction. Nearby, of course, you have the kibbutzim, where there are still hostages, some dead, some living in Hamas captivity. And then you have the families, the family members of many of those who fell in battle, who were murdered. Some of them were unarmed, the female soldiers at Nahal Oz base. And you have the families of loved ones who are still in captivity. There's a whole range of people. And they're advocating ferociously for the establishment of a state commission of inquiry. And there are many others in Israel who support that aspiration. To me, it should be a given after this incomprehensible, colossal, total failure to protect the citizens and the consequences. Representatives of this council of families went to the Knesset yesterday. There was going to be a discussion in a plenary session, meaning everyone's present in the Knesset, and they wanted to attend this discussion and make their views known. Not be disruptive, but be present. And it seems that the Knesset Speaker, Amir Ohana, issued a directive to the police inside the Knesset that they were not to be allowed in to watch this discussion, which, I mean, this is the parliament in a democracy. It's supposed to be open to the people. It's accountable to the people. So there's the whole philosophical / theoretical issue. There's the pragmatic issue of why is this happening? And then there's the horror of watching the spectacle of parents of children who fell, in particular, Rafi Ben Shitrit, the father of a soldier who fell at Nahal Oz base on October 7th, literally being beaten in the Knesset, thrown to the floor, handled and treated in such a manner that I was looking at it, and I think many others, saying, who are we? What have we become? What is going on here? So start with the last part, and then let's go in and talk about the imperative of having a state commission of inquiry and Benjamin Netanyahu's continued refusal to do so, saying it'll be stacked with politically biased people. As Eli Sharabi said so eloquently on Uvda recently, when they came into my home, nobody asked me what my politics are. When they murdered my family, they didn't ask them what their politics are. This transcends partisanship and politics.
Let me remind you also, Vivian, that of the incident recently with Roni Eshel's father and Moshe Gafni. Also, Ayala Eshel is the father, is a member of that council, and said to Gafni, who's a member of Knesset, look me in the eye. And Gafni said, I don't want to look you in the eye. I mean, the utter contempt, disrespect, lack of compassion, lack of gratitude to the people who have paid the ultimate price. Well, the people who paid the ultimate price are the people who were killed. The people who are left to carry along the scars and the burden of losing a loved one are these people. And the way that they were treated yesterday, I was watching the videos coming out of the Knesset, and I was horrified. And to me, horrified, I think you said it beautifully and eloquent. How has this happened? How did we become like this? But it's also it's so sad because it shows we've learned nothing. It shows that we are cold-hearted to these people, but it also, or so at least some people are, but it also is a gift to our enemies. I mean, if you are an enemy of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, you are lapping this up because you're saying, we don't even got to do anything. They're going to do it to themselves. I mean, we are just doing it over and over again, and we're setting ourselves up for the next disaster. That is exactly what we're doing. And the fact that this is something that is orchestrated or ordained by the Speaker of the Knesset, by the Prime Minister, and that they are willing to say, they came up with some excuse in the beginning that the balcony, like the spectator area where people come to the visitors can sit is there's limited space. I'm sorry, bullshit. There's not limited space. There's plenty of space there for people. They didn't want them coming in because they knew they didn't want, you know what it was? I don't even think they were worried about them disrupting. They didn't want to have to see them. They didn't want to have to look them in the eye when they were passing and they were going to have a discussion in a shameful way about how they are once again going to evade responsibility and accountability they are the government that allowed October 7th to happen. And they don't want to have to see Ayal Eshel and be reminded of his daughter or any of these other people. They don't want to have to deal with it. So it's much easier just not to let them in. And it's pathetic and it's disgusting and it's a stain on all of us. And we're responsible because we allowed this government to continue.
And, today there was this really limp, flaccid crap, coming out of the Speaker's office saying, well, yes, no, we just wanted to limit the number of people for whatever reason. But that's not what happened. They tried to block them all. And we're investigating. I'm like, investigating what? What is there to investigate? You put out the order and they executed it. And it's beyond disdain. And there was Eyal Eshel, who we both know, and Rafi Ben Shitrit, who's a big, strong, magnificent man. And I've spoken to many times. And his son fell in battle. And as he said to me so many times, he fought like a lion. And Rafi Ben Shitrit, who had been quite physically badly handled by the police, was standing there crying like a baby. And Eyal Eshel had his arm around him, and he's looking at the police. He's like, what are you doing? What are you doing, and who are you doing this to? Look at what you're doing.
But, Vivian, unfortunately, the government is doing everything it can to avoid a real commission of inquiry. They don't want to investigate, right? They want the investigation basically to stop where it already has been, which is the IDF, and that all the responsibility should rest on the shoulders of Herzi Halevi and Ronain Bar, the head of the Shabak, the Shin Bet, and shouldn't go anywhere up. It's got nothing to do with these guys, right? They just weren't woken up. They weren't told about it. They just weren't known. They weren't informed in the middle of the night. Bibi hasn't been prime minister for the last, I don't know, 15, 16 years, except for a year and a half in the middle. He didn't set any policy. He had nothing to do with this. I mean, by the way, I don't think everyone made this connection, but if you remember that a few weeks ago, the new president of the Supreme Court, Yitzhak Amit, was sworn in, right? Bibi refused to go to the ceremony. Amir Ohana didn't go to the ceremony. The justice minister did not go. Yariv Levin did not go to the ceremony. Why did they do that? So everyone kind of looks at it that there's the battle between the high court and the government, the judicial reform. I don't think so. I want to give a different interpretation.
Please.
They are delegitimizing Yitzhak Amit for the very simple reason that if at the end of the day, they have no choice but to establish a commission of inquiry, which might end up happening still. Yitzhak Amit, according to the law, the president of the Supreme Court, is the person who is granted the mandate to then decide who to choose to lead the committee and to serve on the committee. By delegitimizing him already now, they have effectively delegitimized the commission of inquiry.
Miki Zohar, who is a Likud member for those viewers who may not be aware, was on TV last night trying to justify what happened in the Knesset with these families yesterday. And when the journalists started to ask him questions about exactly this, the delegitimization of the court, of the justice system, of the new chief justice, he's like, no, it's not really related, which was interesting in and of itself. We got a few minutes to wrap and a really important issue I still want to address. And that is the way in which the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has treated the hostages and their families throughout. I've met with so many of them over the course of the last year and a half, almost year and a half, since October 7. Time after time after time, they say his office didn't reach out. No one in the government reached out. No one talked to us when the body bag came home. Nothing. So now we have the most recent release over 6 weeks. We know that President Trump was very disturbed, in particular by the release of the three men, Or Levy, Eli Sharabi, and Ohad Ben Ami, because they were, as he said, they looked like they came out of a concentration camp after World War II, and they did. And he found that very, very disturbing. And then he famously saw the 5+ minute clip of the Eli Sharabi interview. And by the way, I'll post the whole thing in the notes here to the full interview to our listeners and viewers. And now, tonight, Eli Sharabi, along with, I don't know, there's about 10 or 12 of them, returned hostages, have been invited to Washington, D.C. They'll be listening to the president's speech tonight, and I'm sure having other visits. And the respect that President Trump shows to these people, the proper respect, the attention, the comments he makes. Our own prime minister doesn't do that. He doesn't visit them. He doesn't talk about them. He doesn't invite them to the Knesset to show them kavod, respect. He doesn't invite them to his home. I mean, the dichotomy, the contrast is just arresting. No? It takes your breath away.
It takes my breath away. It does. And we saw that Netanyahu, for example, did have a phone call with Eli Sharabi, I think it was Sunday night, but that was obviously after Trump had already invited him. Bibi hadn't spoken to him. So Eli Sharabi's going to go to Washington, meet with Trump. Trump's going to say, I'm sure you spoke to Netanyahu. And he's like, no, actually, I didn't. So at least he had to have the phone call. Netanyahu has done everything, if you think about it for a moment, to stay away from funerals, stay away from Shiva houses, stay away from anything that has to do with hostages, except if there was a military rescue. But even in those cases, he barely met them. and definitely anything to do with talking to them. When we saw just over the last couple of weeks, after there were 6 hostages, right, that were released last week, who were the 2 that he immediately called that same day? Avira Mengistu, his family, right, Ethiopian Israeli, mentally challenged or handicapped, I don't know what the right term would be, who had been crossed into Gaza about 10 years ago, and the family of Hisham Asadi, who was the Bedouin, right? He spoke to the 2 who were taken under completely different circumstances, but the 4 men who were released. He didn't speak to Omer Shem-Tov's family, right? He didn't speak to Tal Shoam's family. I mean, why not, right? Because they have criticism, right? They will ask him, Netanyahu, where were you? You abandoned us. Where were you? Right? And he can't deal with it. But the crazy thing is, and you know this, and I know this, and I think most people know this, leadership is not just about the good times. It's about the bad times. It's about being there, taking it, suffering,
Showing up.
Showing up,
Getting
yelled at, getting screamed at, getting cursed, letting them scream and cry at you, and standing there and taking it. I don't want to sound like, take it like a man, but take it. You got to, to use the term, take it like a woman too, but you have to take it because you are the leader and you abandoned them. And it's your responsibility. And the fact that you refuse to do it is shameful. It really is.
I know we're out of time, but I have to ask you one more question. Do you think that we're going to end up with a state commission of inquiry?
I think we're going to end up with something. I don't know if it will be the state commission of inquiry that you or I would want, the one that, according to the current law. I think that something will end up moving here. There's no choice but to really deeply investigate this. What exactly that will look like, there's different proposals on the table. We need something. I mean, all these IDF probes are really important. And, I wrote a book that will come out in September, so I could plug my book now, called While Israel Slept, which looks at, it does look at the 24 hours preceding October 7th, that's that pivotal moment. But it looks at the 20 years or so before and how we got to this point through policies and strategies and political considerations. That has to be looked at because it will happen again. And if we ignore that whole aspect, it's not just about what the IDF had or didn't have on the border. That's a piece of it. That's the tactical piece. We need to go up to the higher strategic level, and we need a commission to do that.
Yeah, it reminds me of the quite prophetic words that a very good friend of mine, 7th generation Israeli, said at the very beginning of this. They said, I don't know that I want an inquiry. We should just kind of identify the 10 people who matter most and deal with it. And he said, I want to know how deep the rot goes. And he's got 3 sons who serve. And I've come around to agree with him and you. And on that note, that cheerful note, we don't have a lot of good cheer these days around here, but we try. Thank you so much again, Ya'akov. It's always amazing talking to you, and have a good trip doing whatever it is you're doing out there.
Thank you.
We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Yon Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager, who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.